Hello, everyone. Um, Today we are starting a new chapter um, on page number 16. Um, this is Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. Um, Today I'm just going to give you a detailed introduction about what is the story about who Nelson Mandela was. Um, Before we start the chapter, if you can refer to your dictionaries and take out a word called apartheid. Apartheid is the key note for this story. The general understanding of apartheid in African language is separateness. When someone is separated from someone, to disconnect someone, I should say. So, what led this story? How did this story come into being? Is of um, it's a serious topic, I should say, and one of the best examples of human rights violation started from South Africa. The story started. I'll just give you an introduction about how did everything start. So, apartheid. What is the general understanding of apartheid? If you're referring to your dictionaries, apartheid means it's a legal discrimination of South Africans from with fellow white South Africans. So we are talking about black South Africans and how these black South Africans were discriminated for nearly 50 years. They started in 1948. So basically, how did all this story start? I just would like to give you a brief introduction. Is that when the continent was controlled between the fellow the original Africans, and this is the starting of colonialism, when Britishers had taken a major part of South Africa. Remember, South Africa is till date one of the richest countries in terms of natural resources are concerned, and everything is so good and fertile there. So in that process of differences between the Britishers and the original South Africans, there was a difference of opinion, and finally, when the Britishers left South Africa, um, they left a legacy called apartheid, something that we Indians, and in fact every country which was colonized by Britishers, has a perfect example of that. So in this process, apartheid um, came into being. And how did it come into being is because the fellow black South Africans were segregated in terms of their skin color, and the white South Africans um, were considered superior than the black South Africans, and this discrimination went on and on, in terms of gender, in terms of everything that you can imagine, just because of skin color. And the apartheid process started from 1948, and it continued till the early years of 1990s. So more than 50 years of struggle um, had seen enough bloodshed, had seen enough loss of lives, had she seen enough exploitation of a country within by fellow white South Africans. If I am referring to my phone, and if I Google apartheid in my phone, um, it's very saddening, I should say, that you have these. If you remember, even during the Indian freedom struggle, how there was a discrimination between Indians and whites, and how there were boards everywhere saying that Indians and dogs are not allowed. If you remember the freedom struggle, you must have read that in your history books. Something very similar, some kind of these boards are written here. One of the boards says, caution, beware of natives. Natives means black South Africans. And one of the boards says, for use by white persons only. This shows the superiority. Unfortunately, we are not talking about, in our case, in the Indians' case, we were dominated by white Britishers. But here in this situation in South Africa, the fellow South Africans were dominating their fellow brothers on the basis of their skin color. So white South Africans had dominated the fellow black South Africans. So this board says these public premises and the facilities therefore have been reserved for the exclusive use of white people only. This is written in English and French. And so this is the segregation which started. The schooling system was segregated and divided between the blacks and white South Africans. And the black South Africans could attend school only till 13 years of age, and then they would be forced to go into labor. Or most of the black South Africans, they were forced to go and work as laborers, slaves, I should say, in all these mines. You know, South Africa has a rich, God has gifted South Africa with a rich resource, natural resource produce. So most of the iron mines and the diamond mines and the zinc mines, everything, wherever you could see, these black South Africans were forced to work as slaves and laborers, and with limited wages, and they were exploited to every extent that you can imagine. Public places were banned for black South Africans. Public transport was banned for South Africans. Public hospitals were banned for fellow South Africans, and everything was divided. And this went on and on, as I said, for 50 years. So, as everyone says, that suppression has its shelf life. It has a period, and then there's a point when there's a phrase in English which says there's a point when suppressed emotions could no longer be controlled, and that is the point when the freedom struggle started in South Africa. So the father of nation is referred to none than Nelson Mandela in South Africa. So it all started, and Nelson Mandela grew up in this situation. And now, after understanding this introduction about what are we basically going to read in this chapter, I'll give you an introduction about who Nelson Mandela was.